Hello, and welcome to episode 271 of the Thursday Night Podcast. My name is Brady. I'm joined by David as always, and we are back after an unintended mini little hiatus on the bye week. Full disclosure, wasn't in our plans to do it this way. Had something we were hoping to line up on the content front. But I ended up going out of town the end of last week. Went to Virginia with some family. Caught like game of the year type stuff, going to the FSU Virginia game in Charlottesville, saw a proper field storming that was actually just entirely chaotic.
My favorite part is you're kind of like Waldo when it comes to, you go to a lot of college football, obviously, you go to.
But as a neutral, the last two I've gone to have been that one and the Texas-Arizona State in the Peach Bowl college football playoff.
Exactly. Just insane games that you just happen to show up at.
The moral of the story is, like, just go to college football and chaos and fun chaos will find you. But that happened as we're recording this podcast today on Tuesday. Your Chicago Cubs are up in the wild card against the San Diego Padres. You were in attendance, so a good attendance of sports by all of us on this podcast. 100% bangers this week for Georgia State for Thursday Night Podcast. Even if that's not been the case for Georgia State on the football field, that was what I was trying to just say. Maybe a break's best for everyone. I don't think anyone was screaming for extra analysis of the Vanderbilt game, but we're through that. The bye week has been concluded, and we are back into game week, and we are into Sunbelt play as Georgia State will host James Madison this Saturday in Center Park Stadium for the Sunbelt opener for Panthers. The Dukes already got underway. We'll get into that in a sec, but I guess before we leave it completely, we should start with, like, you're not going to be able to erase the 1-3 start. You're not going to be able to erase giving up 63 points to Ole Miss. You're not going to be able to erase 70 points given up to Vanderbilt. And as things stand right now, Georgia State is giving up 48 points per game. To get to 30 points per game, I put this out on Twitter last week at some point, I forget exactly when. The rest of the way, they would have to average giving up 20.5 points a game in their final 8 games, which they have not done a single time since Del McGee has been head coach. The lowest point total they have held an opponent to is 21. So 30 is kind of a benchmark I'd use. Is kind of like if you're in that ballpark, you could at least be like a bowl team, like hanging around. Like the difference between 30 points a game given up and 28 feels like the difference between like those marginal bowl records. So they will literally have to do something they haven't done under Del McGee yet to get to that point. And I think no matter what, even if the season does turn around, the numbers might just look ugly because you gave up 60 twice in a season. Like, there's going to be no coming back from that on the stat sheet. So it's going to be kind of just how did they use this bye week? How did they get over? How did they manage, like, there's things they need to correct, but also they were playing some good teams, so where's the mentality at? And, like, is the team still locked into the message that they were before any games were played at the end of August? And that's the stuff we're going to find out. And, like, honestly, that's going to be the stuff that dictates the way this Saturday goes and the rest of the season goes just overall, because it's like this has the potential to put them on a downward trend and sink the season, and it certainly doesn't get any easier this Saturday with one of the better teams in the Sun Belt, but how they have managed what just happened and how quickly they can flush it will do a lot for what we can think of this coaching staff and their ability to get these guys ready to play every Saturday, and also just where their mentality is at. Like, we'll learn pretty quickly, I think, on this Saturday, like, all of that, and it's going to be important because they can control all of that. They can make it a real bad first 4 games that they had, or it can define the rest of their season, and we're going to find out which way it goes pretty shortly.
Well said. I think the the damning stat of the Georgia State out of conference is, one, they currently have the worst scoring defense in the country, obviously. And two, Georgia State's out of conference opponents are a combined 15-4. And if you are an astute person who is very good at math, you'll know that Georgia State has 3 losses, which means that all of those teams are undefeated. 2 of them are ranked. Ole Miss is up to number 4, which, whatever. And Vanderbilt is 16th. Memphis got some votes, not ranked. That's fine.
They should be, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of played with their food a little with Florida Atlantic this past weekend, but then dropped 31 on them in the fourth quarter to just put the game totally away. Them or Tulane or North Texas or I'm forgetting one. Like the Americans got some real
there's some
ballers this year.
Yeah.
Like, and Memphis is part of that, and they beat Arkansas. And honestly, I don't want to keep getting drug into September talk because we want to move forward, but it's like they played that team well, especially we talked about how the final score was a little bit misleading, but it's like in the grand scheme of things, that was their best game in September because we don't think that they gave their best 100% effort against Murray State, even though they won that one. And clearly the other two are not candidates for the best game because of the way the final score. Like that's the place you stop on the analysis on that front. But it's like the end of the day, if this team doesn't turn it around and they're, a 2-win team, 3-win team, whatever, it will be like, how the heck was this team in the game with Memphis leading or should have been leading at halftime in that game? Because they're going to keep putting up really big numbers on other teams. And, the defense held them to 31, and you had the 7 thrown on with the pick 6, and it's just kind of like that team maybe had some juice, and it's just been kind of not trending in the right direction since then. We're just going to kind of have to see how much of that is fixable, how much of that is just kind of who this team is, and that questions still exist about this team and this coaching staff after 2 years under Del McGee.
Yeah, I mean, I think this might be a hot take. No, it's probably not a hot take. If Finley starts week 1 and has like a normal offseason, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Georgia State would have beat Memphis, but I think it would feel a lot easier to say that Memphis was their best game, if that makes sense. Like, yes, I'm hedging a lot of bets in a way, but I do think that they played exceptionally well in Memphis. Against Memphis in a way that they kind of haven't played against other FBS teams. Like, obviously Ole Miss and Vanderbilt were what they were. So, and that I think is the springboard that you can take moving forward here. Full disclosure, I don't expect them to win this weekend. James Madison, good team. They're just pretty much the class of the Sun Belt again right now. But I do think that this is a game where Georgia State is going to be able to say, all right, look, we've had, we had the week off. We had a tough non-con. I think everybody kind of expected it'd be 1-4, but maybe not. 1-3, but maybe not 1-3, and look like this. You've gotten a few more weeks of practice under your belt. You've gotten a few more weeks with your wacky quarterback situation. At some point, though, now is the time to just start executing better on some of those things that you and I have been talking about for the last few weeks.
Yeah, so let's get into it now. Run through who they're playing. Mentioned it's James Madison. It'll be at 3:30 Eastern Time in Atlanta. ESPN Plus will be where you can find the game. The Dukes are 3-1 and 1-0 in Sun Belt play after blasting Georgia Southern 35-10 last Saturday in Harrisonburg. Their head coach is Bob Chesney. He is 12-5 in his 1-ish seasons at James Madison. And his overall record is 123-51 with stops at Salve Regina, Assumption, and Holy Cross. He's leveled his way up to FBS and fitting in right where he left off at the other places where he just kind of won all along. And this is a team, kind of a 2-week stretch of this now, coming up with next week's game that we'll get to, obviously, next week. Georgia State has not beaten James Madison in 4 attempts, and they lost the only home matchup in this head-to-head 42-14 back in 2023 when Kurt Signetti was the JMU head coach. So that's kind of the CV of this team. I mentioned that they just kind of handled business last week against Georgia Southern. Never really felt like a game that they were at risk of losing. The yardage and stuff looks a lot more in their favor. They, I think, held Georgia Southern, negative rushing yards in the first half and ended up being a very minute number in the second, in the overall game. They are the number 1 passing defense in the Sun Belt, the number 3 rushing defense in the Sun Belt. Both very good numbers. That's 90.5 rushing yards a game allowed at 2.81 yards per carry and just 2 rushing touchdowns through 4 games. They beat Liberty 31-13 on the road the week before that, and it's the thing where they still haven't really, they didn't put up a score of anything like what happened to Georgia State at the hands of Ole Miss and Vanderbilt, where it's like they were never in danger of losing, but they haven't totally like skunked the team yet. It's just kind of been like they knew they were going to win. And I guess that's the place where it starts with this one for me is like you got to keep in that range. Even if you're going to lose this one, they are, depending on where you look, some amount of 3 touchdown favorites or 3 score favorites against Georgia State on the road speaks to the expectations for this game. But like play them to that line. Like if we're having another talk where it's like a 52-10 or like something drastically worse than the expectation from the spread, and like you're having a lot of the mess that's been happening, it's going to be a real problem, because even if the effect of a bye can be overstated, it's like, all right, but after the performance you had in Nashville, like all of that stuff has to be much more professional heading into this game. And so it's like weird expectation set, because after the way that the season started, you want them to go out there and mow a team down or whatever, but it's just like the reality is you're going to have to go at least another week before you can talk about a game where you can reasonably expect to win. And this is going to be about how do you approach it from the start? How do you respond to how you played in your last game? And this is going to be a team that's going to punish you in the same caliber of Ole Miss and Vanderbilt if you let them, if you give them the mistakes you've been doing for the first month of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, it is tough because I don't think you and I have been, I don't think you and I are calling for any coaches to be gone. It's more like okay, now we need to start talking about this if it still looks this bad type situation.
Yeah, I forget exactly how I left it on the Vanderbilt postgame show, which feels like 7 months ago at this point. Like, this is a important 8-game stretch for Del McGee, because if they're going 3-9 and worse again this year, you really have to question, like, what direction is this going but down? And is this going to be a tenable situation, even heading into year 3? So, like, not calling for it in the traditional sense of, like, this needed to happen over the bye week, but it's like, we got to see how serious this football program is going to look under Del McGee. Like, the clock is at least starting on that conversation.
Exactly. And I'm not going to sit here and say, I think the last line I saw was like literally 21. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it was a 25-point loss. Like, that's not them, meeting expectations or whatever. No, that there are certainly ways in which a 25-point loss does not end up looking like the Vanderbilt loss. But like, you cannot let another game just be so uncompetitive. And I think that to me is the big thing with James Madison. And I know that sucks to hear. I know that sounds annoying to hear, where it's like we are just automatically resigned to the fact that from a talent basis, from a coaching basis, a scheme basis, right now Georgia State is probably not going to win this football game. And that's fine. But at the same time though, like, you got to figure out where this is going, because we exited an era of, and I know that Del McGee was not the reason why, Coach Elliott was not fired or anything, but we just exited an era where the low water mark after 2018 was 5 wins ish,
They went 4-8 in 22, and that was a underperformance in like a weird year, and that team should have been a 6-win team. Like, in the moment, they lost some games they shouldn't have, and should have made a bowl, whereas like you have to take real stretches to like say like last year's team or like what we've seen so far this year's team is that it's an unfair reflection on them that they're 1-3 right now, and so here's what I will say in favor of college football is always wacky and you can never write anything off is, that should be motivation on easy mode, as far as like if there's any time you're going to catch James Madison maybe a little bit sleepy. Much is said about Georgia State's environment or lack thereof. If it's a little bit quieter than what they're used to, if they're coming on the road expecting to win, and if Georgia State comes prepared, ready to play, that could be your magic moment where everything comes together and you're able to find a way in this game that no one's giving you a chance to win. You just got to take advantage of that, and that starts with what you're able to do. Another footnote here as we're looking at this game, obviously coming off the first bye in 2025, I will give them a little bit of like, it was a weird bye situation in 2024. You had game by right back to back, splitting September and October. But Del McGee 0-2 out of byes as Georgia State head coach. They lose to Georgia Southern 38-21. They lose to Old Dominion 21-14 in those situations last year. And they only lost by 7 to ODU, but that was the game where it was like, oh, we're making a swap at quarterback, and just did not look very good. And of the games that they lost by one possession, feels like the one that, like, if they had a chance to get it back, maybe that's the one you'd feel. That or App State, maybe you could flip the other way if you're just any more competitive in that game, or more able to out-execute the other team and not kind of be stuck in the mud on offense. So this is another chance.
The ball at all in that second half against Old Dominion, and Old Dominion also wasn't scoring well.
You're not really in that place. I mean, the defense, I guess you got questions about like what's going on there, but I don't think you're in, like, we entered already kind of wondering, like, last game didn't go well against Georgia Southern. What are we going to do with the quarterback situation if Veyer doesn't look good again? And we got our answer in the ODU game. The quarterback thing, I guess we can, we'll keep talking about because it's going to come up every week. It still exists, but it's not really the same conversation, because I think either answer, if you just pick one, would be better than what you had last year, where you just really didn't trust what Christian was doing game to game. And Zach Gibson was an option, but you didn't feel maybe as good about him as you do about Cameron Brown, if that's the decision they took, if you want to compare it to this year. But it'll be an opportunity to see if this year, especially with the way the first month of the season goes, just kind of how Del McGee is able to get more out of them heading out of a bye. Because you look across the sport, and it really is a thing where some coaches are just really good at it. Some coaches struggle at it. Some coaches are really good at coaching in bowl games. Some struggle at it. Like, there is certain things that ultimately reflect on how coaches are able to manage these different situational things. And last year it didn't go well with buys for Del McGee, so this is a chance to maybe rewrite that story for him and his staff. I guess we can do. You want to do the quarterback thing now? Weekly quarterback conversation until otherwise.
Yeah, I have a question for you about not quarterbacks, but yeah, we can do quarterbacks now.
Well, I bring it up because a lot was made, even by us on this podcast, as we look across the rest of the sport doing a pick 'em. JMU started the year. They were doing a 2-quarterback thing, not unlike Georgia State. They had Alonzo Barnett, who was the starter last year, coming off an injury. They had Matthew Sluka, who was at UNLV last year, but was with Bob Chesney at Holy Cross before that, so there's some familiarity there. And for the first, I guess, was it 2 games? Yeah, because they had a very early bye. First 2 games of the year, they were doing the 2-quarterback thing, and it kind of felt like it hurt them in their almost ability to beat Louisville in that second week of the season. I believe we talked about that on the pod, so we don't need to hang on that too much longer. But even heading into, I think, the Liberty game, and this is something certainly going to touch on when we have the Ask the Expert section later on this podcast, it still felt like it was a little up in the air of like, yeah, we're doing the 2-quarterback thing. But it's been the Alonzo Barnett show since. He led them, I think, played most or all of the snaps against Liberty, played most of the snaps against Georgia Southern until just they had the ability to just pull them in the second half and play the backups. This is maybe a model you can follow. If you're coming out of the bye, even as today, at his weekly availability, Del McGee said that they were going to be playing. Like, he said yes when asked if there'd be a 2-quarterback situation again with Georgia State. You can't just lie and it just be on Saturday. It's like you've made a decision and move on. And I wrote a piece. I did the Keys to October for Georgia State football for Panther Talk on the bye week just to keep the theme going. I've been doing Keys to the game every week. Obviously no game. So I looked further ahead and just kind of looked at what the team needs to do to look better over the next month of football. And the last thing I ended up putting was pick a quarterback, any quarterback. And I do mean that earnestly. I think we both agree that if it was our decision, we'd pick Cameron Brown. Just offers a little bit more as far as mobility, and actually has been the more accurate, kind of more on the ball with the passing. But you've seen some of the deep stuff from TJ Finley, and I think you could honestly make an argument both ways. I just don't think you can keep arguing for both. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything but just putting off the decision, trying to keep everyone a little bit happy, and I don't think that necessarily helps anyone at the end of the day. And when you're talking about there's false starts galore, there's procedural stuff, I don't think it's either of the QB's fault individually that stuff's happening, but if you're having a lot of that crop up, and you're also switching quarterbacks in and out, and you've got different guys setting the play, it wouldn't be surprising if that's a side effect of all that. So it feels just important that you pick someone and go roll with it, move forward, deal with the consequences. If a guy's unhappy, it's like you got to pick someone. And you know that if you end up having to switch again, whether it's because of an injury or because of ineffective play, that you trust the backup there. I don't think there's a huge gap. And you see with JMU that the same kind of questions were there with them of like, what are we going to be able to do if we keep sticking with this system that just kind of like you're sticking with two guys, you're not picking. They go with Barnett, and everything seems like they've, raised with the offense where it's still not. I think they would say still that there's meat on the bone to get as far as putting it all together, but it certainly has been a more cohesive product for them on offense the last couple weeks, and I think it is not a coincidence that happened when they made a choice at quarterback. So a chance to mirror what a conference mate has done, and I think make your team better. But I guess we'll see what ends up happening with that on Saturday. It wouldn't surprise me just based on it is literally what he said today. If we do continue to see both, I just think it is ultimately the team's detriment if that remains to be the case week after week, and just we do this for 12 games.
And it just doesn't really make a lot of sense because I think Finley has a good arm. I think Finley can show that he can be a good quarterback. I'm just not seeing where the upside is coming from. Because even when Finley has made some of the plays, like you had some of the injury stuff happen in the Memphis game. Okay. Obviously the Murray State game is what it is. But even in that game, I still felt like there was more upside with the offense when Brown came in. And I know that was, after the game was a little bit more the game was kind of heading towards not in the balance anymore. But still, I just think Brown offered you more in terms of upside that I'm waiting to see it come from Finley. And hey, maybe it does come, maybe this is the week where he puts, 4 incredible scoring drives together and, Brown still comes in, but it's like, okay, maybe this guy just needed some extra rest and some extra reps in the offense during practice. And, now he's just ready to let it fly and be great. I don't know, but I think as a matter of principle, it makes more sense for them just to go with Brown, because the times where Brown has been able to just say, okay, I'm in this game now, I'm just going to let it loose, there has been upside. You've seen what he can do with his legs. Like, yeah, he doesn't have as good of a deep ball, but they've still moved the ball more effectively. And it's not like Finley is batting 1,000 with his deep ball either. Like there have been times where those deep balls connections aren't happening, for a variety of reasons. I don't say that just specifically to blame him, but, the point stands.
Yeah, I mean, I stand by the idea that I think that everyone should be higher in their evaluation of TJ Finley than they have. Like, I think there's a consensus on him right now that is like, TJ's bad, you got to go to Cam. And I just think it's just that Cam is better. I don't think TJ's bad at all. I just think, like you said, Cam is better. Yeah, and the thing that has really kept the offense in quicksand, let's say, is they're really struggling to run the ball. And I don't really put that on quarterback. I think they need to block it up better as it is, but when you have that extra person teams have to account for in the run game, it does help a little bit. And it's just like, that would be the thing you try to do if you're trying to unglue the run game. And so you go make that quarterback decision and lean into the run aspect of it, because right now you need to get that going. You're at 109.5 yards per game, 3.84 yards per carry. Mirroring JMU, you only have 2 rushing touchdowns on the season, as they've only given up 2. And so this is maybe not the matchup you're hoping to see like a massive improvement, because this is a very, very good run defense, probably the best front 7 they'll see the rest of the season. And it might be one of the better front, like they might beat some of the teams they've already lost to in terms of just how good this front 7 is. They were getting after with Louisville, who is a good ACC team. They were kind of dominating that first half where they were kind of controlling proceedings with their guys up front. All that said, you still need to see it come together, because we're looking at another passing offense that's one of the better statistically in the Sun Belt, and you're looking at a scoring offense that is, like last year, one of the worst in the Sun Belt. And there's a correlation there for sure. And so I think that's where your thought process has to be, is like, how can we get that part of the game better? Because that's what's holding our offense back. It's what making us worse in short yardage situations to where our third down numbers aren't where we want them to be. And so you risk running the exact same formula back last year with some different players where, like, last year's team was the same way. Great passing offense when you look at the numbers. It didn't correlate to the offense as a whole being all that successful. And so you're in the danger zone there, and you head into this week. It's a stout defensive front, but they're really, really a problem when you get behind the sticks and can't run the ball, because then they can tee off on you, bring some pressure, and then, good luck. So I think it's an important thing that we got to see. Like, you're not going to change your scheme entirely over 1 week. The bye week is not going to be just kind of like a magical fix to everything that's been going wrong, but find something to scheme up there in the run, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble with this one and going forward.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that was where my question was going to emanate from, because I want to know at what point it is a concern that Georgia State's rushing operation looks the way that it does. And I mean,
the Murray State game, like, already a concern for me. I mean, you didn't do enough in that one. Yeah, the other ones you played, you can explain away. It's like, this is the teams you're playing, but, like, it's amazing that Ole Miss is the most rushing yards still. Like, it is amazing that they didn't beat that against Murray State, who's not a particularly good FCS team. As hard as they played in that game, it's like, how are we sitting here and the 191 against Ole Miss is the most you've had in a single game? And I guess you have to say, like, I didn't feel like in the moment it was that mirage-y, but you have to say more and more it's looking like it was, because you're just not seeing it. You haven't seen anything like it in the weeks that followed, including against the FCS team you played.
And it's frustrating because the Murray State result looks very deceptive. Like, yes, they still hit 166 on 32 attempts, 5 a carry. Like, yeah, that all looks great. And then if you kind of go back and chart the runs, it's like two really big runs, and then a whole bunch of 2-yard, maybe a 3-yard here, a 1 year, like, not.
And you look across everyone else. Game. Georgia State's I believe the only team that has not just kind of had their success against that Murray State run defense. Like, they played Jack State. I believe Jack State won by 30-ish points. I don't have that one in front of me, but took care of business. That's a really good rushing offense if you look at the numbers in FBS. The FCS teams, we gave you those numbers that preview week of, like, this is the opportunity. And I don't need to obsess over that one. It's just kind of like, that was your game. You're looking for hope, where you're heading into this one where it's like, look, we don't know. They struggled against Vanderbilt. They struggled against Memphis on the ground. But they got this 300-yard game against Murray State, so maybe that's what you're able to plug into this one and just kind of find any success. You don't have that. You're just still in the place of, like, hope it comes together. And that was kind of how it was last year. And, eventually it did. Ran the ball successfully against Texas State, and that was a factor in addition to one of the better passing games of the year, and Dorian Fleming have an outstanding performance that night in San Marcos, but we weren't going into that game expecting that. And that was game, 11? Like, you certainly cannot get into November and still have questions about this rushing attack, or it's just the answer is going to be no. That you're running out of time, and unfortunately this isn't a week where you can really expect to just blast off, have a ton of success, but see what you can do where you catch them looking at your old tendencies. Maybe you run something out of something that's been a past look on film. I don't know. I'm not an offensive coordinator. I do not claim to be an expert in these matters. It just doesn't seem like on a down-to-down basis you've had that much success, so you might have to try and cheat it a little bit this week and just find a way to beat this James Madison rushing defense on an occasional basis and let that be what opens up the rest of the offense. And then going forward, you want to maybe see it be a bit more consistent. But measuring this heading in with proper expectations, it's not like we can say with any credibility that this is the week you're going to top 200 rushing yards. If it happens, you might win the game. Whoever wins the rushing attack will win the game is basically what Del McGee said in his press conference today. And for the reasons of what we've seen from these two teams, that's basically the only number you have to go to of why Georgia Southern... That's basically the only reason you have to go to the James Madison is such a heavy favorite in this game. Forget everything else. So I'm just kind of throwing my hands up, as I can literally do that now because we do it on video. we'll see what it looks like. Not heading in with massive expectations. I guess the other thing to watch there is that Alec Johnson has been missing the last couple games, and if you get him back, maybe that helps, because you need a little bit more juice in the interior. That's where it really hasn't been working for the Georgia State rushing offense.
It just, something has to get better. I'm not sure what it's going to take. I also conveniently am not an offensive coordinator. But it just has not.
Seems like an awful job to be. It's like so much pressure.
Oh yeah, I mean,
you got people on podcasts yelling about what you're doing wrong every week.
The thing too is it's such a unforgiving podcast because an unforgiving job, because sometimes there are people who will watch a play, not recognize where the actual error was, and then just blame the offensive coordinator. Like, no, I schemed this correctly. It's about execution, and also defenses are good. So we'll see if Georgia State can kind of scheme up some good offense against James Madison, because you really are going to start needing to show something here if this era is going to continue as it is currently continuing. And, I want to like Coach McGee. I got nothing against him. The hire made sense. The hire was good. But, yeah, I just things are definitely pointing down currently.
On the defensive side of things, just kind of see any kind of indication that this kind of weird downturn is an aberration and not just kind of who this defense is. I mean, I don't expect that they are giving up 48 a game for an eternity, but against Vanderbilt, they really struggled stopping either phase. And I think this is going to be a week where James Madison is going to be perfectly comfortable just to keep running it if that's where they're having success. So job one is going to be stopping the run. And I think if there's questions for this JMU team, and so like the questions that their coaching staff, their fans have, it's around like how much better can this passing game get? Because it's, comparatively, it has been pedestrian. They're getting 160 yards passing per game, but only one of those games did they cross 200 passing yards. It was 213 in the win over Liberty. Sluka had 2 interceptions. I think one of those was really late against Louisville, so you kind of throw those out. It's not been a turnover problem so much as just kind of not being all that explosive. But when you're running for 249 a game, it doesn't really matter, and so for Georgia State's purposes, that's where it's got to start. I still really I might be totally off on this. I just think that the run defense and just the front in general is a lot better than the numbers that have been put out. Like, I just don't think they are this bad against the run. And watching, I've done a little bit of bouncing around to the games, and I was watching like live the JMU Louisville game, but didn't catch the other ones live so much. But against Georgia Southern, let's just say there were some interesting light boxes that just never got amended, and so JMU just played the numbers games a few times and busted some nice runs. But they were also doing stuff where they'd be flaring some pass catchers or running backs out of the backfield out wide and moving guys and creating holes. So eye discipline going to be important again this week. Looking just to see that fight again, and just, again, going back to my keys of October that I put out, just got to find some kind of edge. Like, you maybe aren't going to be beating everyone down to down and just kind of getting off the field every series, but it's like, whether it's scheming your way to getting some turnovers, whether it's just bend but don't break and you get off the field instead of giving up 8 touchdowns in 8 red zone trips to Vanderbilt, like, you've got to find whatever part of the defense you can kind of row back on and start to have an effect on the game. Because against Vanderbilt, it was kind of just bend and break and 5 TFLs, but I can't remember one that really like put them way beyond the sticks. Obviously, you've had 1 turnover in the 3 games since you had the 2 INTs against Ole Miss that made you think, maybe this is kind of a frisky defense that's going to be opportunistic. You need to find a way to get back to that. And this is the case for just about every quarterback. I can't imagine there are many that are better facing pressure than with a clean pocket, but Alonzo Barnett is more gettable when he's been under pressure rather than when he's been able to sit back there in the passing game. And so it's going to be important for this one because there's been a noticeable statistical difference between those 2 quarterbacks, him with guys in his face and those him without those guys in his face. And so, well, again, lots up in the air just far as what they're going to look like and mentality. And I mean, we don't need to do any more time on special teams. It's kind of like, it's got to not be just outright terrible. And it's been pretty indefensibly bad the last couple of games.
My one defense note is third down. The only team that Georgia State has held to a below 50% third down rate is Murray State. I'm going to say that again because I said 50% third down rate is what opponents are converting against Georgia State. It hasn't been good. To be honest, it really has not been good. Part of that is just, teams who they've played and, when you've given up 133 points between two games, you're probably going to have situations where your third down conversion rate looks worse than it will probably end up settling at. So, but again, Memphis was right at that 50% mark. So, finding a way to actually get off the field on third down will be important. And yeah, like special teams, I mean, at some point, you just got to stop the bleeding. We can worry about being good later, but just like you have been bleeding. At this point, an arm and a leg have been amputated. So, we got to find a way to stop the bleeding there because it has been so bad.
It's been a yearly ritual with this team of kind of like going from, is this your special teams is good, turning into just like, don't embarrass us type deal. If we're here on the bye week at the end of October and they've made all their chippies in the field goal unit, they haven't any kicks blocked, they're not muffing punts, basically independent of anything else, feels like that's a success on the grade of this season. So just get back to that. Like, said it before the Vandy game of like, you're putting this out on tape, teams are going to find something, they're going to keep sending these blocks at you, and that paid off, unfortunately, because they got a pump blocked and a kick blocked and an extra point blocked against Vanderbilt. Clearly something has been going wrong fundamentally there, and we tried to break that down as best as we could on the post-game show, but just got to clean that has all got to go away overnight. Because again, this is another team. Bob Chesney's got his background in special teams. They'll make this team pay if they do not have that stuff cleaned up, and they will certainly be sending the house at least one time on these punts, if not more than that, just because it's been clear, like, there's blood in the water on this one. And other teams are going to see that film and kind of salivate until proven otherwise.
Yeah, hopefully it gets better because it has been just, like, I can excuse, I think, the bad offense sometimes because it really has not been all that bad outside of some of the rushing. I can excuse even the defense because if you course correct for opponent, then okay, makes sense. I can't excuse bad special teams. Like that's the one that, like, for the most part, even if it's not the most part, but for where Georgia State's issues have been, that's the stuff that's controllable by you, So that definitely needs to improve in a hurry because it's just not it right now.
So that's our look at the James Madison Georgia State game, 3:30 on Saturday on ESPN Plus. Games in Atlanta. Before we move on to the end of our show, teased it earlier, we have another Ask the Expert segment going a little bit more in depth on the JMU side of things. So here's that interview now. And we're back with another episode of Thursday Night Ask the Expert, where we bring on a guest who knows their stuff and can tell us all about Georgia State's upcoming opponent. So my guest this week is Catie Harper, who's the JMU football beat writer for the Daily News Record in Harrisonburg. Perfect person to ask about the Dukes heading into Saturday's matchup. Catie, thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I guess this is where I start with everyone I have on this series, just your time on the beat, and I guess specifically the direction you've seen them take under second-year head coach Bob Chesney.
Yeah, so I've been at least around the JMU football program since 2016 when I first started as a student and covering them since my sophomore year. So I've seen them through the Mike Houston, Kurt Signetti era and now into the Bob Chesney. I would say this year it's probably seeming that it's a little bit more of Bob Chesney style. It's the second year, so he's getting a little bit more of his guys in the program, how he wants them to act, kind of what he wants them doing out in the community, and then translating it onto the football field. And what he wants his product to look like on game days. So it's been a fun one. I think people look at this team, they see a really, really, really good defense, and I think the offense right now is starting to catch up to it.
Yeah, let's go in on that offense, and a situation Georgia State fans will be familiar with. There was a 2 QB conversation at the beginning of the year. You had Alonzo Barnett and then Matthew Sluka, who had played with Chesney at Holy Cross. And it seemed like that was going to keep going on, and then out of the bye week, it seems like it's been the Alonzo Barnett show. So I guess, was it as sudden as it seemed from the outside with that? Was it your expectation that Barnett was going to suddenly take over? And then I guess just speak to what you've seen from the new solid QB1.
Yeah, I think it's been just kind of a wild offseason watching this quarterback battle. Alonzo was extremely limited in what he was able to do over fall camp, and he showed up on the field at the end of spring practice in the last practice that they had, and none of us really expected to see him there with the injury that he had against Marshall. But I would say within the last couple of practices of fall camp, I started being looking at myself and being like, wow, I think Alonzo Barnett is about to somehow get back in pretty much 9 months from a serious knee injury. And during that Louisville game on national television Friday night, people are paying attention, and it just didn't seem to click for them offensively. It had worked well using both Matthew Sluka and Alonzo Barnett against Weber State, but it's Weber State versus, and it's not even the Weber State that JMU played when they were in the FCS. It was a Weber State program that's been down the last couple of years, so you would hope it would work against them. But going into the Louisville game and it not really clicking at all, Bob Chesney seemed very hesitant to really answer any questions on who was going to come out of the bye week and get that nod, and it was Alonzo Barnett, and he hasn't really looked back. We've seen Matthew Sluka a few times now, both in this last week against Georgia Southern. Didn't see him at all at Liberty. But I do think Bob Chesney likes what Alonzo Barnett can bring, and a lot of that is because he is very reliable through the air. He doesn't put the ball in many bad places where it's going to get intercepted. He had 4 interceptions last year. He had a bad one at Liberty. But for the most part, he puts it in a very good place, and that's the kind of quarterback I think this offense can really use well because they have the run game to support him.
You mentioned maybe the offense coming along, maybe not all the way where Bob Chesney wants it. I guess, what are those areas that maybe they're still looking for improvement versus what are the strengths of the offense? I think they're probably going to lean on for the most part heading into Saturday against Georgia State.
I think they're starting to find their strength now with the offensive line playing really well. It was a group that was older, so I think a lot of people thought coming into the season it would start better than it did. But over the last 2 weeks, they haven't given up a sack, and when Alonzo Barnett has time, I think that's when he really is at his best because he can connect with some really good wide receivers right now that are experienced. They've been proven at the FCS level before making this jump. And their bread and butter right now is still running the football. That was on display this weekend, even without George Pettaway and Iowa Dei. Wayne Knight has just grown into an absolute star in the run game, and I think people were able to finally see what Jordan Fuller, who was a star at the FCS level, was able to bring. So that is kind of right now what really sets this offense apart, and I think when the receiving game gets going, it's very impressive. And Alonzo Barnett right now is starting to heat up and connect, especially with the tight end, Coda Dupree.
And you referenced the strength of the defense. I guess you can look at the statistics and kind of it all bears out, but I guess what do you think it is that makes the defense sort of tick and have them playing as well as they are?
Historically at JMU, I think there is a pride on the defensive side of the ball. It's been a group that has been really, really good for the last several of years. And right now, under Colin Hitchler in his first year as the defensive coordinator, what a lot of the players have said is that they really get the chance to play free and they can play fast and kind of go after the ball. And I think there are a lot of guys on this defense that kind of are ball hawks and they can just find it from across the field. DJ Barksdale is one who, he had a tackle at Louisville where he was on the opposite side of the field, saw the receiver catch a screen, and he was across the field and tackling him before he even got to the line of scrimmage. It was one of those moments where you're like, okay, wow, he can spot that from yards away. But I think a lot of it all starts with Trent Hendrick, who had a career day over the weekend against Georgia Southern at linebacker. He's kind of what makes this defense tick right now. They take a lot of pride in the run game and stopping the run. They take a lot of pride in getting takeaways, which haven't come as fast of a rate as it did last year, but they still have the ability to do it. And it's one of those that I think they just have a relentless mindset that teams maybe can't hang in with them for all 4 quarters the way that they want to play the game.
And I guess should ask about the third phase as well. I'm a sicko, so I might ask about special teams no matter what, but Georgia State has had some real issues. So I'm wondering going into this game, and I'm sure fans are as well, like what JMU might present from a special teams perspective and where they've been good, where they haven't been, and how that might look on Saturday, because those are the plays that, if it ends up being closer than the experts think, that might be where it shows up in a bigger way.
It's interesting. JMU has had its own struggles on special teams this year, but they've also had very bright spots, and it depends of what angle you're looking at it at. Curtis Harris-Lopez had an 88-yard kick return for a touchdown against Georgia Southern. It was his first return at JMU. Wayne Knight is, again, like he is in the running game. He is really, really good in the return game, and Bob Chesney likes him in that role and says that he has no fear of running full speed at someone who's running full speed at him. So the return game for JMU is very sound. Kickoff coverage is usually very sound because Cristiano Rosa doesn't even put it really in a place where teams can return the ball. Field goals have been great. Morgan Suarez is new to the team. He's missed 1, I think, but he's usually pretty sound. They've had some issues in the punt game with a new punter who they're getting, still kind of into the system completely. He had, I guess it went down as a negative 22-yard team punt against Georgia Southern, which was just kind of one of those freak ones. Snap goes over his head. He tries to get a wet football off, and it went right out of bounds. Louisville, he had an 8-yard punt. So there are some issues in the punt game. I would say for the most part, it's been okay, and at least when the punt gets off well, the coverage is there to back it up.
I will say, I saw that Louisville one. That was like the most unlucky 8-yard punt that took the craziest bounce. Yeah. I don't think you can put that on the punter.
No. And it's kind of, the negative 22-yarder one this past weekend was another one. The weather was mixed in with it. I saw an interview with him yesterday where he said he wasn't going to blame the weather, but a wet football rolling on the ground is not usually going to get off for a good punt.
And I like to throw something open, just kind of totally open-ended for a person who's covering the team, just kind of maybe mention something that just is on their mind. Is something that you've learned about this team, something you're waiting to learn, just whatever comes to mind as far as just generally you seeing it day in, day out, what you want, where you want to take the conversation.
Wow, okay. I mean, there are things that I see daily that I want to see more of when it comes to this team. I think the receiving game is one that I kind of touched on earlier, that I still think there is so much kind of untapped potential in that group that just they haven't all come together for one game when one solid performance yet. They had some drops again over the weekend, but I think with guys like Nick DeGennaro and Landon Ellis, who's just kind of seeming like a long touchdown magnet at this point, and Jalen Sanchez, that's a group that I want to see them all kind of click in one game, because we're starting to see it now where, like I had mentioned, Lakota Dupree, their tight end, who last year was playing defensive end at Charlotte, is really just starting to come into as this big yardage receiver. So I think there's so much potential in that group that watching this team as much as I do, I want to see it all kind of click in one game like we've seen with the running backs so far.
And, JMU, no stranger to success on the football field, won some FCS titles. The Sun Belt title has eluded them, and obviously now the CFP is the G5, G6 spot is what everyone's kind of pushing for at this point. How much are those type of goals specifically talked about, and is it like something that they're addressing head on versus the stock, like we got to take it one game at a time, all that stuff?
They definitely kind of go in on the one game at a time, and I would say from what I've heard the players say, they talk way more about the Sun Belt Championship than they do making the college football playoffs. They do mention the college football playoffs, but I think when you look at guys like Trent Hendrick and Jacob Thomas, who are the 2 team captains and they've been at JMU for 4 years, not having a Sun Belt title right now kind of feels personal to them, because they went through the transition of not even being eligible to win it, while it was arguably the best team was JMU. So I think right now that's the one that I think, if I had to guess, they're probably wanting the most. And to even have it where they could potentially play for it in Harrisonburg for the first time, I think that's one that would be very special, because even when you look at the college football playoff, it can still be a long way out for any G5 team just because of it's only one spot.
Well, Catie, that was great stuff. Thanks for taking us through all angles of the James Madison Dukes ahead of Saturday's game in Atlanta.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Catie for taking the time to speak with us, and I will turn it over to Master Salmon for the concluding portion of our... Apologies again, weirdness because of the bye week that we ended up taking. We will end up having skipped a week and pick them.
Yes.
Scores will remain as they are. We don't need to do any funkiness. Like, we're not going to give everyone a different, the same
No.
average score for the week or whatever.
Yeah. No.
Hope everyone was watching though, because it was a great week of college football. But I think probably not even worth last week before was we're 2 weeks away from that already. So less interested in kind of how we got to this point. Really going to focus now on this upcoming week.
Yeah. I will just say, we'll square everything off just for where we are. Brady is at 36 wins, or correct. 7 incorrect. I'm at 32 and 11. For you astute listeners who remember that I put the wrong school for several of them, even if I had put the correct school in all of them, I still would be losing, so don't you have to worry about that. This week, I will run through the Sunbelt non-conference games. ULM is here facing Chicago's Big Ten team, the Northwestern Wildcats. Oregon State has the unfortunate idea to travel across the country to face the Mountaineers of App State in Boone. And honestly, I feel pretty bad for all 4 teams involved in this because I don't think any of the teams want to be in this game. I'll just say it. We both have Northwestern winning. Northwestern, please.
This is, outside of the Service Academy games, this might be the shortest game of the year. I mean, it might even beat a couple of those. Because it's going to be 2 teams I think are going to run the ball a bunch.
Yeah.
ULM for just what they want to do anyway, but also makes sense for them to shorten this game. Just low number of possessions. Hope they have fun on the lake. A bit jealous, actually. I feel like this whole saga of the Northwestern playing in the facility on Lake Michigan is going to come and go without me having any chance to go to a game. And I just, it feels like an experience.
Yeah.
I've had all the, I've gone to Death Valley, gone to both Death Valleys actually. Went to Nashville this past week, but on a whole different level. I just wanted that football on the lake just seems awesome.
Yeah, it's I'm kicking myself that I wasn't able to go last week because last week would have been perfect. But I also did not see the value in paying those prices to watch UCLA and Northwestern attempt to play football.
But yeah, we have Northwestern winning. We both have App State winning, although they lost 47-14 at Boise. Really don't know what to make of App State. Just feels like there's even less to make of this Oregon State team that really feels... I mean, they've been left for dead in a dead conference, and I think that's kind of shown. They lose their head coach to Michigan State. Yeah. I think it's shown. This would be, I think, cause for concern if this Beavers team is able to head across country, having not won a game the first month of the season and put together a nice winning performance in Boone. But I think you can make the case that Oregon State should have beaten Houston this past Saturday. Was it Friday night?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if that was the same night as the FSU game because obviously
yes,
you wouldn't have seen it. But I
did
watched
not lay
this game.
any eyes on that.
I watched this game. It definitely, there was a moment in the game where it was like, okay, if Houston is going to do this, it needs to be now, and Oregon State is just going to have to, basically oblige, and that is exactly what happened. Houston had no business forcing overtime in this game, and they were able to do it, and it really is sad. I know that I didn't really know the heyday of, Oregon State football whenever that was. But I know people talked about Corvallis a lot. So, I'm definitely good when it comes to college football bits. But yeah, I think the reason we both are picking App State has kind of less to do with App State and more to do with where Oregon State football is, which is sad, but, coming across the country from a west to the east is never easy, and that is just not a team that is playing inspired football right now, regardless of who's going to line up on the other side of them Saturday. So,
also, if you're out there commiserating about Georgia State's special teams, as we just ended the segment on JMU's Georgia State, Oregon State's the worst special teams by a lot of metrics. And they're having trouble with even the foundational part of like snapping to the punter. So I know you're out there thinking it can't get worse, but it evidently can.
Trust
and
me.
Oregon State has been showing that in their 4 games this year.
Not only can it get worse, I'm going to, make reference to something that I did earlier in this pod. If anybody who's watching the YouTube cast, I definitely made a face during the James Madison thing. And here's how worse it can get. New Mexico State averages 40 rushing yards a game. So, yeah, it definitely can get worse.
Oof.
Yeah, that's bad. But not important here because we're talking about Sunbelt teams now.
Not former Sunbelt teams.
Correct.
God, what an era that was.
What a time to be alive. James Madison and Georgia State, we kind of went over it. We both have Georgia State. Texas State and Arkansas State is interesting because I think if you and I asked our past selves, like preseason, we probably would have had Arkansas State here. But Texas State is probably going to end this game pretty comfortably winning because I don't really know what's going on with Arkansas State, but they are not playing good football right now.
Getting late early for Butch Jones.
Yeah.
I think Kennesaw State, clearly, like, the competency level's been risen under Jerry Mack, and that is important because Georgia State plays them next year, but I still don't think they're like world beaters in the college football world, and Arkansas State was lucky to bring this back to a 1-score game when they played in Kennesaw a couple weeks ago. They were down 3 scores very early, and it was kind of like getting played off the field. Lose to ULM last week, which is on the road, and I think ULM we need to give respect to is like a decent Sunbelt team. Like I think at this point, I know they did it last year where they went 5-1 to 5-7, but they feel like they're in a better spot to make a bowl this year, particularly if they can go prove us wrong and go win on the field in Evanston this Saturday. But still a game that if you're trying to put together a bowl season and keep the positive momentum going, if you're Butch Jones, you need to have that one. You need to have Kennesaw. It's a weird situation because they should have been, like, the reason I think people thought they'd be decent this year, and certainly I did, is they brought back a ton. Jalen Raynor was back at QB. Corey Rucker was back at wide receiver. They brought back, I think, a lot on the defense as well, and there's kind of like hopes of like continuity will be a good thing here, and so far it hasn't been. And Texas State looks like they're just rolling like they have been under G.J. Kinney. I mean, it's a road game for them, toughish spot, just on the grounds of it's hard to win on the road college football, but I think they'll be fine here. I think they'll win comfortably, and Jonesboro is going to be a sad place in college football for the remainder of the season, I fear.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, do you know how hard it is to have your quarterback throw for 285 passing yards and your team still not pass 300 yards of offense? That's pretty hard. That's pretty hard. And that's exactly what happened to Arkansas State last week when they played ULM. So, I agree with you that we probably should be at least monitoring the situation in Monroe, but that's just a tough beat if you're a Red Wolf. It's sad because I think that last year they did really show you something, especially with the way that they ended the season. They got by a, prisky Old Dominion team at the end there, but that was still an 8-win, Arkansas
I think you just made up a word, but that's fine.
Yeah, I feel like I did too, but that's okay. I make up words all the time. It's fine. Prickly is a better way of saying what I wanted to say then. But it doesn't look right now for Arkansas State. And it's not even just who they are playing. I don't think them losing by 1 score to Iowa State was really indicative of what their talent is right now. So, but we'll see. And then Coastal Carolina is going to Old Dominion. I think Old Dominion is playing good football right now. I think Coastal Carolina is attempting to play football at all right now. So that pretty much says that. If you have anything else, you're welcome.
They did beat South Alabama on the road, which still perplexes me to no end. That being Coastal did that. We did not expect that to happen.
I think the answer to that is South Alabama is always good for one of those games where they just stop being good every year. They do something like that. I feel like there's always a loss that South Alabama takes like this.
Yeah, I've got ODU winning as well. I think I should have been more bullish and just picked them to win the East because I was pretty high on them anyway, and I was kind of like giving the deference to JMU, but I'd looked smarter, I think, by season's end if I had just gone ahead and gone whole hog on that one because I just think they're the best team in the league right now. And I think we can have the conversation at some point. If you remove the state of Virginia from the Sun Belt this year, pretty dire. Not been a good year for not been a good year for the conference, and I think it's okay to admit that because obviously everyone wants the Sun Belt to perform well, be perceived as the best or one of the better group of 5, group of 6 leagues, and this year it's not. The years where it's not, you got to be honest and just call a spade, and looking pretty rough as we enter the month of October.
I'm going to be honest. I think that trend kind of started last year, though. Like, I feel like the last 2 years, like, yes, there were, Marshall got to 10 wins, Louisiana got to 10 wins. Obviously, they had great seasons, we know. But I really feel like some of that spark that the Sun Belt had, 21, 22, 23, they definitely have taken some level of step back. I'm not really sure, unfortunately, what level of step back it is, just because you're not winning Power 5 games, and there was some last year, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where you take the step back. I liken where the Sun Belt is in relation to other, peer conferences. And right now, I just don't think that the Sun Belt is actually pushing anybody else in that group of 5, in terms of full conference. So,
yeah, I mean, I think if you call it what it is, I think the teams we mentioned earlier, like way back near the beginning of the episode, we're talking about the American. I think they have a much greater level of seriousness and commitment to college football right now. Money is basically what I'm saying. And there are certainly some teams in the Sun Belt that are putting that forward, and surprise, surprise, there's some of the teams that are better year in, year out. But I think when you measure up the leagues as a whole, and you look at especially the top of the American and those teams that are basically in the yearly playoff conversation for the G5 spot every year, they are putting a lot more where their mouth is than this league as a whole. And so some of it's academic in that sense. You can't just do it forever on grit and culture fit and a bunch of teams that enjoy being in the same league as each other. And certainly some of the schools have been trying to do something about that. Even Georgia State is not at the top of the league in that, but from where they were a year ago as far as financial commitment and NIL and rev share and all of that, they are in a better place than they were last September and the September before that and so on and so on. So this can get flipped. The American wasn't always this. Certainly some of the teams that you're seeing doing at the top of the American have not always been powerhouses in college football, and so these things can be cyclical. These can even flip on a season's notice. But they're certainly the Sun Belt's with at least in the pack with some of the the MAC, the Conference USA. They had been kind of skirting that where they're more like the Mountain West and the American, and even some years, a couple years ago, you could make the argument that they were the best overall league among the G5s. You're in a lot less comfortable of a spot than you want to be right now. And so I don't know how quickly that gets turned around. I don't know if it's a blip. Certainly Georgia State winning more games and looking better in their non-conference would go a long way to fixing that perception, or at least go 1/14 of a way towards fixing that. But we haven't really addressed it on this podcast yet, and I think we should be saying it. Everyone who does a Sun Belt podcast should be just recognizing what's going on, because it's the first step to admitting you got a problem, and living in denial about this is not going to make it any better because everyone else can see what's going on. And so if you're trying to glaze the Sun Belt this moment, maybe take a step back, because it isn't it right now. And it's going to happen.
We can talk about it when we kind of get more into Sun Belt basketball, but I think people were very quick to notice it with basketball and not as quick to notice it with football. And to be fair, football had certainly a couple better highs than basketball did, I will say. And they were better for longer, but yeah, I fully agree. We definitely need to start talking about it a little bit because it hasn't been as good. Just to be frank, it just hasn't been as good. Speaking of hasn't been as good, sorry, did you want to go?
I was just going to, let's roll out the last one.
Yeah.
Rivalry.
Yeah, rivalry week,
Sunbelt game.
Troy, South Alabama. This game is in, I was going to say Alabama, Jesus. This one is in Troy. And I have South Alabama. You have Troy. We can't just have a clean slate of
I was
the
like,
same ones.
This
so
is
I'm
our
glad
only split this week. And as of now, I am 36-7 on the year. You're 32-11. So my reign will at least go on for another week.
Exactly.
And it's not really for the sake of just picking differently on this one. The Coastal loss has me asking questions I didn't have about South Alabama before. They lost to North Texas last week as well. And Troy battled with Clemson, which looks less impressive as the weeks go on, but it's still a Clemson team with a lot of talent for sure. And it's at home, and this is a series that until the last couple of years they had kind of handled things on, and you kind of buy into like this is going to be a big game for them at home. So I just kind of like the home team here.
And I get that. I guess my thing is I still don't trust this Troy team. I really don't think that them battling with Clemson was anything else but Clemson had kind of an overhyped quarterback coming into the season, and he didn't play great for 3 quarters. The Buffalo win, though, does kind of make me pause. There was a 9-win team last year. Forgive me, I don't have my full offseason for Buffalo off the top of my head. But they still went on the road and won a game. That's obviously a good thing to do. But yeah, I think South Alabama is due for one in this series. And I think that this is probably, the worst Troy team that they've seen in a while, even if this Troy team might not be as bad as they were last year. And probably not as bad as people thought they were going to be this year. And I really don't think that South Alabama is this bad. Because if they are this bad, then there's probably some other issues that we need to talk about. But, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
That's right. That's the end of this pickup segment, brought to you by Prisky, the official cat food of the Thursday Night Podcast.
There we go. We've said it. Now it's got to be a thing.
It's not a sponsor because it's not an actual company, but I eventually came to it. It's like, it's a cat food company. That's what Prisky is.
Exactly.
All right, so that's going to do it for this episode. We'll be back with the post-game show, whatever happens with Saturday's contest against JMU. Hope you appreciate every angle we've been able to give on this one. Month of October going to tell us a lot about where this team's going to go. Maybe this week a little bit less than the rest of the season, but less the rest of the month. But certainly we'll get our first glimpse of what this team's going to look like in conference play, how they stack up against their conference peers. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Stay prisky.